What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through the best draft strategy from picks 1 through 4 in your fantasy football drafts. I do want to apologize in advance if my voice sounds a little bit off. Feeling a little bit under the weather, throat's a little sore, but we're going to be powering through. And if I'm being totally honest, the draft strategy videos are honestly like my favorite pieces of content that I put out throughout the off season. I feel like they're super applicable, and I feel like they do kind of, put out a lot of information and just help you guys get a decent kind of overview of potential draft strategies that you guys can take into your fantasy football leagues. So in today's video, I'm going to be going through some of the players I'd like to target, in rounds 1, 2, or 3 when we can kind of predict what fantasy football ADP is going to be looking at. So looking at solid targets there, I'm going to be breaking down 4 different mock drafts that I did from each draft spot. So pick 1, 2, 3, and 4. Just talking about some general trends and some strategies that I think are important when you have an early pick, in the first round. So let's just jump right into it. And we're going to start off by looking at some of the targets. And obviously we're going to be starting off here in round 1. So I actually compiled ADP from 3 different sites. So I went ESPN, Yahoo, and then Sleeper. I combined the ADPs, and you can see here on the graphic. So Justin Jefferson is the number 1 pick according to ADP, or the consensus ADP at 1.7. And I have these guys color coded. So green, these are players that I really like in this range. Yellow, I'm okay with picking them, but I guess I'm not like overly excited. And then red would be I'd be fading these guys. So these are kind of like the 8 picks that you have a shot at seeing in the top 4. As you can see here, the first 3 guys here, Justin Jefferson, Christian McCaffrey, Jamar Chase. I really like all 3 of these players. I think if you're getting really any of these guys from pick 1 through 4, it's a win. Jefferson's my 101 in my rankings. I have Chase as my 102. Christian McCaffrey is my 103. If you go CMC at 1, Jefferson at 1, I don't really care. I think both those guys are solid picks. If you get Chase anywhere from 2 on, I think he's a great pick. I think things start to get a little interesting when we look at pick 4, because at least in my opinion, that is my consensus top 3. Then I feel like you could be going in a few different directions. I think in some leagues, you're going to see guys like Tyreek Hill and Cooper Kupp go at 4 and 5. Maybe they even go a little bit earlier. I wouldn't be shocked. I think in other leagues, you're going to see running backs go early. So whether it's Austin Eckler or Bijan Robinson, I think you could see one of those guys up there. I also think there's a shot that Travis Kelce could kind of sneak in. And if I'm being honest, he's kind of the only player out of this 8 that I really don't love at pick 4. I believe I have Travis Kelce as my number 9 overall player. For me, I really struggle to put him ahead of Kupp, Hill, honestly, Bijan and Eckler at this spot. I just think you're drafting a tight end who I believe is going to be turning 34 years old. I'm just not willing to do that over guys like Eckler, Kupp, Bijan, or Tyreek Hill. And also you're going to see in some of my mock drafts, you're able to get Mark Andrews in the 3rd round. I'd much rather get 3rd round Mark Andrews than have to reach at a top 4 pick to draft Travis Kelce. So basically in the 1st round, love Jefferson, love CMC, love Jamar Chase. And then I'm fine with pretty much any combo of, Eckler, Kupp, Bijan, or Tyreek Hill for that 4th overall pick. Now shifting into round 2, or I guess like the 2-3 turn, looking at players you could be finding here in round 2. So we've got Nick Chubb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Garrett Wilson, Tony Pollard. We start to get into some of the quarterbacks with Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. And then to kind of wrap up this area, we have Jalen Waddle and Breece Hall. So as you can see by the ADP, some of these guys may not be available when you're picking at, 21, 22, 23, or 24. But then I also have guys like Jalen Waddle or Breece Hall who are kind of, according to consensus, going a little bit after. So just getting the full range here. And as you can see, there's pretty much 6 out of 8 of these players I love here. I think the back end of the 2nd round, there's going to be some really nice options available. Everyone's draft is going to be different. Some drafts are going to be super wide receiver heavy. Others, the running backs are just going to get, completely wiped out early to mid 2nd round. But as you can see here, Nick Chubb, you're getting Nick Chubb back into the 2nd. I think that's a huge W. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Garrett Wilson. If you start off with a running back, one of those guys is your wide receiver 1. I feel solid. You start off with a Jefferson, a Chase, a Hill, a Kupp. You get those guys as your wide receiver 2. I think you're in a great spot. And then Tony Pollard, love him here at the back end of the 2nd. You can see the only 2 players I don't like here are Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. I do think these guys are warranted to be top 3 quarterbacks. We actually have Mahomes going ahead of this, according to the consensus ADP. I just really can't rationalize going after these dudes in the the late second round. Even early third, as you're going to see in a little bit, is just too rich for me. So I'm hard passing on those guys. Behind them, Jalen Waddle, Breece Hall. Also love both of those guys at their price. So pretty much here, I want to be going after the non-quarterbacks. I think the value's there. Just fading those quarterbacks, especially as you're going to see once I start to get into my mock drafts. You're going to be able to get some high upside quarterbacks fall to you in the later fourth round. So I'm not going to be reaching in the late second when I can get high upside guys, 2 rounds later. And then finally, looking at round 3, obviously we have some repeats here because it's at the turn. Still not interested in Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts. Still very interested in Jalen Waddle and Breece Hall. And then we have 3 straight running backs here. Breece Hall, one of them, Travis Etienne, and then Ramondre Stevenson. And then we also have Najee Harris. So I'm pretty much going to be in on Ramondre Stevenson here, and I'm going to be out on Etienne and Najee Harris. So I feel like Ramondre Stevenson is in that tier with guys like Breece Hall, Josh Jacobs, Chubb, Pollard. I feel like he's in with those guys. Derrick Henry, not sure if I mentioned him. At least in my opinion, I view Travis Etienne and Najee Harris in a tier below those guys and kind of significantly below those options. So I'd be willing to spend an early third round pick on any of those running backs in the tier I just mentioned. For guys like Etienne and Najee Harris, I'm fine getting those guys at like the 3-4 turn. Earlier than that, I'm just not going to be biting. I don't think they have the guaranteed workloads as some of these other guys. So that's why I'd be avoiding them at this spot. And then Mark Andrews here, the second tight end, behind Travis Kelce. I think he's a great option here in the early third round. You're getting a guy who's proven he has a very high ceiling, and you're getting him in the third round. I think it's solid, very high on the Ravens this season, so I like Mark Andrews there in the early third round. Now we're going to be shifting into some of my mock drafts. So this first one here is going to be from the first overall pick. This was a PPR scoring draft, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 2 flexes in the starting lineup. This one did have a kicker defense. Not really focused on that for this specific video. But at the 101, I think I mentioned at the top, Justin Jefferson is going to be my consensus 101, especially in PPR scoring. So I went with Justin Jefferson at the 101 overall here. We can see guys, Eckler, Chase, McCaffrey was the top 4, kind of what I was talking about earlier. And then we can see what picks I went with here at the 2-3 turn. So I actually think I got kind of lucky here. I was able to go Derrick Henry, Breece Hall back to back. I think this is honestly like the dream setup here. If you're confident that you can get these running backs to fall to you at like the 2-3 turn, like this worked out pretty much perfectly. But if we kind of ran into a spot where maybe, Olave and Keenan Allen fell and Henry and Breece Hall went there, we could be kind of in a rough spot. And that's something I noticed in my other mock drafts. If you're picking from pick 1 through 4, I think you really want to be confident that you're going to be leaving the first 3 rounds with at least 1 running back, because as you can see throughout these mock drafts, I just don't really love the value of running backs once we're getting late 4th round and on. Once we start getting into the handcuffs, I'll start firing some shots off. But other than that, I think the value is at the wide receiver position. And I think if you don't pick 1 running back in those first 3 rounds, you're going to be stuck in this tough spot where the value is going to be at wide receiver, and you kind of have to pass on it to get some weak running back. If you do want to go true 0 RB, I get it. I just do really like these running backs that are going to be going late round 2, early round 3. So Henry, Breece Hall back-to-back. Love the way that played out. At the 4-5 turn, I went Jerry Jeudy at wide receiver. So far, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers. And then I got one of those elite upside quarterbacks in Justin Fields at the 501. Love the value of Fields there. You can see Jalen Hurts went early third round. Some of the other guys honestly did fall. Mahomes went like later in the third round. So maybe the value isn't insane, but I do like the pick of Fields. And then 3 of my next 4 picks were just pounding the wide receiver position. So I had Christian Kirk in round 6, round 8, Quentin Johnston, round 9, Elijah Moore, and then round 10, Rashad Bateman. And then I had Darren Waller thrown in there in the 7th round. Like I said, I got my 2 running backs in a PPR scoring. I especially want those wide receivers to fill out the flexes. So looking at my starting lineup, Justin Fields, Derrick Henry, Breece Hall, And then Justin Jefferson, Jerry Jeudy at wide receiver, Waller at tight end. My flexes, Christian Kirk, Quentin Johnston. I have wide receivers, Elijah Moore and Rashad Bateman on the bench, which I feel very solid with. And then to kind of wrap up the rest of the rounds, just threw some darts on some of these running backs, Elijah Mitchell, Kendre Miller, Tank Bigsby. All these guys probably need an injury ahead of them to really be startable. But, Derrick Henry, Breece Hall, if those guys are healthy, they're going to be locked in starters. And then hopefully you catch some sort of injury break. Obviously, you don't want, players injured, but something happens where Elijah Mitchell steps into the starting job, Kendre Miller, Tank Bigsby, then those guys do become startable. So that was my draft from the 101. Now shifting over to the 102, the second overall pick. This is also going to be PPR scoring, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and then just 1 flex in this mock draft. And this is going to be another example of a draft where I kind of went with like a double hero RB strategy. Once again, not going into these drafts saying like this is exactly what's going to happen, but it's kind of just the way it played out. So this was a spot where Justin Jefferson went off the board at the 101. At the 102, I was pretty much choosing between Christian McCaffrey or Jamar Chase. Since I went wide receiver with the 101, thought, maybe switch it up a little bit. Went with Christian McCaffrey here at the 102. I was able to get Breece Hall falling back to me at the 211. This was a spot where a lot of the running backs kind of went early, and I didn't love a lot of the options behind Breece Hall, so I was kind of fortunate he fell to me here, but it really wouldn't have been the end of the world if he didn't, because I did go Christian McCaffrey at the 102. Then you can see for 4 straight rounds, just spammed the wide receiver position. Loved the 4 straight wide receivers I was able to pick up. So Chris Olave in round 3. I also considered Mark Andrews here, but I ended up going with Andrews in the later 2 drafts, so, kind of wanted to balance it out. So Chris Olave in the 3rd, McLaurin in the 4th, DJ Moore in the 5th, then Mike Williams in the 6th round. So at this point, I have both my running back slots filled up. I have my 2 wide receiver spots, my flex spot, and then 1 bench slot filled up here with Mike Williams, I guess, on the bench, or DJ Moore, Terry McLaurin, whatever guy you do want to be starting there. Then I ended up going with Darren Waller in round 7. I think I went with him also in the first draft. I like the value. I think he's, a good spot here, has some upside at the tight end position, and you're getting him in round 7, which I like. Ended up going with Deshaun Watson in round 8. I like him at this spot. You're getting him close to pick 100, somewhere around there. I think it makes sense. And then I actually got his teammate, Elijah Moore. A nice little stack here, even though Elijah Moore is on the bench. If Deshaun Watson booms, Elijah Mitchell's probably going to be having a pretty strong season. And then since I hadn't picked any running backs since the first 2 rounds, just kind of rifled off Mitchell, Algier, Bigsby. You can kind of see these are just the types of running backs I'm going to be targeting later on. Then scooped up Nico Collins to, I believe, be my 6th wide receiver, and then got Tajay Spears later in the draft. I guess you could have thrown a dart on a tight end or a quarterback, but for me, I feel like Waller and Watson are going to be solid options this season. So now shifting into the 3rd draft, this was the 103, the 3rd overall pick, and this draft was actually a half-point PPR. So we can see the first 2 picks were McCaffrey and Justin Jefferson. This was a spot where I pretty much was going to be going Jamar Chase, or maybe I'd consider an Eckler or a Bijan Robinson. I went with Chase here at the 103. I got Breece Hall in the 2nd round. Pretty much I was choosing between Breece Hall and Ramondre Stevenson. I'm very high on Breece Hall heading into the season. I like Ramondre also. If Breece Hall was already picked, I'd be cool taking Ramondre, but I do prefer Breece Hall just a little bit here. And then I ended up going with Mark Andrews in round 3. I could have gone with a wide receiver like a Devonta Smith. I kind of want to pass on these quarterbacks, so I did like the Mark Andrews pick, getting a high upside tight end. Then over the next 3 rounds, I went wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver, kind of a trend. Rounds 4 through 6, 7, I have just been hammering that wide receiver position. So Jerry Jeudy, Christian Watson, and Michael Pittman. Now this wide receiver tier, there's a lot of variance. If you prefer a McLaurin, a London, a Moore, a Williams, you're kind of just going to be able to have your pick of your guys at this spot. I just wanted to switch it up a little bit for each of these drafts. And then I ended up going with the quarterback position in round 7. I just liked the value of Trevor Lawrence here in the 7th round. I do feel like there's a decent fall off after him, so I wanted to just kind of secure that position. I didn't really like the running backs that were on the board at this point. I felt like I had, picked a solid crop of wide receivers, and then I still hammered the wide receiver position after the Trevor Lawrence pick. So I went Brandon Cooks in round 8, and then Rashad Bateman in round 9. So this was a spot where I have solid wide receivers. I've got 2 solid wide receivers on my bench that I think can fill in during bye weeks or with injuries to those flex spots. And then since I only had 1 running back at this point, I kind of just had to spam the running back position. Algier, Bigsby, Roshan Johnson, Tajay Spears, all 4 of those guys are pretty much 1 injury away from being startable options. So honestly, maybe early on in the season, this isn't going to be great because maybe Breece Hall isn't fantastic early on, and then these running backs haven't kind of worked into their backfields. But I think long term, it will kind of work out. Obviously, I kind of would like to have a second running back in those first 3 rounds. It just didn't play out that way. I didn't like the running back value in the 3rd round. And since I went with Jamar Chase, didn't go Bijan or Austin Eckler. So I would say that's like the one weakness here. And that's kind of the warning I will put out, that it's like if you can't get at least 1 running back, I just think the running back position is going to suffer, or the other positions are going to suffer because you'll have to draft a running back at a point where the value will be there on the wide receiver position. And now moving into my 4th and final draft, this is where we picked from the 104. And I do think 104 is probably like the least solid position I feel confident drafting from, just because you're not guaranteed one of my big 3, which is Jefferson, Chase, Christian McCaffrey. As you can see in this draft, also, I don't know if I mentioned it, this is a half-point PPR. The last one I did was also half-point PPR, so, switched it up just a little bit. But this is a spot where those first 3 go off, and you kind of could go in a bunch of different directions. Is it Bijan? Is it Eckler? Is it Kupp? Is it Tyreek Hill? For me, I prefer Bijan over Austin Eckler. I wanted to lock down at least 1 running back in the first 3 rounds, so I went with Bijan Robinson, and then I actually got to go with Tony Pollard in the 2nd round. Very high on Pollard this season, and this was honestly a draft where a lot of teams got solid running back value late in the 2nd. Pollard went at the 209, Jacobs went at the 210, Ramondre went at the 211, and then Breece went at the 212. So the value was going to be there, even if you were pick 1, 2, or 3. And then in the 3rd round, pretty much had the option to go with Mark Andrews or get a wide receiver 1 like a T. Higgins. I opted to go with Mark Andrews. I like the positional advantage there. And then, kind of fortunately for us, 4th round, Lamar Jackson fell to the 409. Personally, my tier 1 of quarterbacks features Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, and Lamar Jackson. I have Lamar Jackson in that tier. I think he's going to have a huge season. He already has the highest point per game season for a quarterback. He has the best weapons of his career. He also has, an offense that I think where he's going to be passing the most in terms of volume, throughout his NFL career. So I like this little stack I built here, but we're in a spot where through 4 rounds of the draft, I have no wide receivers. So this is a spot where we needed to hammer the position, and I think I got some solid values. Went Christian Watson in round 5, Marquise Brown in round 6, Tyler Lockett in round 7, Quentin Johnston in round 8, and then Elijah Moore in round 9. So just rattled off 5 straight wide receivers, had 2 running backs, a quarterback at this point, and then I filled the wide receivers and the flex spots also with Elijah Moore as like a depth option, and then I had the elite tight end also. Also only had 2 running backs at this point, so went Elijah Mitchell in the 10th, Tank Bigsby in the 12th, and then also went with Tyler Boyd in there. This was a draft that didn't have a ton of bench spots, so the bench only 4 slots here, but that's just kind of the way the mock was set up. So those are my 4 drafts. Honestly, I think the big takeaway I have here is you want to be flexible, but I do think the one thing you want to focus on is getting at least 1 running back. And I do think this is kind of a spot where you're going to want to try to predict how your league is going to operate, because I could see a spot where, say you're picking at the 101, 102. You like Justin Jefferson, you like Jamar Chase, but if you're in a league where you think these running backs are just going to be sucked up, in the first round and a half, and you don't think you're going to have the option to get a Breece Hall or a Ramondre Stevenson to fall to you in the 2nd round, I really wouldn't blame you for going with a Christian McCaffrey at the 101 or the 102, because I do think you want to get at least 1 running back. On the other hand, if you think, you're in a PPR league, you think people are going to value wide receivers a ton, then, you could go Justin Jefferson at the 101, and you may still have the opportunity to get 1 or 2 other strong running backs like I think I did in my first mock draft, yeah, went Jefferson, Henry, Brees Hall. I feel like that's a pretty great start. So I think you want to look for a running back, but I understand how your strategy could kind of shift where maybe you have to go for a running back in one of those first 4 picks because you're not sure if they're going to get back to you. I think in general, targeting those wide receivers in the mid rounds is kind of the way to go. I think that's where the value is. I think the first 1 through 4 picks, they also give you solid opportunities to get an elite tight end in that early 3rd round. And I also think they give you a nice opportunity to get an elite quarterback to fall back to you in the late 4th, early 5th round. Like you saw, I was able to snag Lamar Jackson in one of these drafts, Justin Fields in another. So I think it's a really solid spot to draft. I think the only risk is if those running backs do get sucked up, your hand kind of could be forced a little bit, but I think in general, it's a solid spot to draft from. Let me know what you guys think of this video. If you are drafting early, let me know how it goes. I'm going to be having videos out for picks 5 through 8 and then 9 through 12 within the next week or so. Going to be kind of mixing in some other videos in between those. If you enjoyed, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.